Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today on this session about AutoML. I'm excited to talk to you guys about creating machine learning models in minutes using AutoML. And specifically, we'll be talking about Amazon SageMaker Autopilot. My name is Ruchita Arora, and I am a Principal Product Manager for Amazon SageMaker. Now, in terms of the agenda, how I wanted to use this time, we'll quickly talk about what is AutoML. Then we'll get into an overview of SageMaker Autopilot and dive deeper into its capabilities. Finally, we'll wrap it up with a demo of Autopilot and talking about a few examples of how customers are using Autopilot today. So what is AutoML? You may have heard the term automated machine learning or AutoML, and you may have heard different folks talk about it differently. Perhaps you heard of a single click or a single call approach to automate your machine learning process. Or you may have read about the low code, no code approach. Some folks also talk about AutoML as applying machine learning to machine learning. In the spirit of what this really means, and I think by now there's a well-established sense of what AutoML is that it allows you to remove that tedious and iterative and time-consuming work across the machine learning workflow. Whether it's, from data acquisition, where you might be prepping the data and then going through feature engineering, to the actual training and tuning piece for building the model. And finally, operationalizing it as you think about deploying the model or monitoring the model, retraining. So the entire workflow. What that really means is you have to spend less time worrying about these lower level details, and you can focus more of your time on actually consuming these machine learning models to improve your business outcomes. So who is AutoML for? Who can actually leverage AutoML? I'm assuming today in the audience we have a varied set of folks. We may have data scientists and expert machine learning practitioners, or you might be someone who is just getting started with your journey in machine learning. So whether you're a novice practitioner or an advanced machine learning practitioner, AutoML is something that can actually help you. I'm assuming there are also lots of folks in the audience today who are either on the business analyst, IT analyst side, or also, machine learning engineers in the ML ops world. And so no matter what your role is, there are ways you can leverage AutoML, and we'll talk about that. So I think this slide provides sort of a good overview of what I was just talking about, in the sense that with AutoML, you're essentially simplifying machine learning. And there are various aspects of the machine learning process that you can actually leverage with respect to AutoML and take advantage of. As I was just talking, AutoML is something that all practitioners can use, whether you are a business user, a data scientist, or a developer. There are AutoML solutions from AWS that you can actually leverage. And the way we think about AutoML, and this is super important, is actually maintaining the full transparency. So AWS makes it easy to help you dive deep into the models that are generated by AutoML. So that's why, going back to my earlier comment, AutoML capabilities help meet you where you are in terms of your expertise level and skill set. And we'll talk through more in detail as we go through the demo. Now, just a quick overview of AutoML offerings from AWS. If you look at the entire portfolio, there are lots of AutoML capabilities that you can actually take advantage of. So for example, here with AutoML for language, You have offerings like Lex, Transcribe, and Amazon Poly. I'm not going to go through each one of these in details, but similarly for vision, you have capabilities such as Amazon Lookout, Amazon Recognition as an example. Likewise, for business metric analysis, you have offerings like Amazon Forecast or Amazon Fraud Detector, and so on and so forth. Now, if you were to look into SageMaker specifically, Amazon SageMaker, you have AutoML capabilities sitting within that. And specifically today, we'll be talking about Autopilot, which helps you automatically build and train models for the data set that you bring in while providing complete visibility into the machine learning models that it builds. So Amazon SageMaker and SageMaker Studio are sort of the vehicle where Autopilot resides. So as you might be already aware, Amazon SageMaker Studio is a fully integrated development environment for machine learning, which enables you to collaborate at scale, provides you easy experiment and management capabilities, along with, of course, Autopilot for helping you get started and accelerate your model building, as well as providing you end-to-end tools and a unified visual interface. Okay, so jumping into actually Autopilot now. As I mentioned earlier, Autopilot essentially builds, trains, and tunes machine learning models automatically on your behalf based on the data that you bring in. And while it does so, it gives you full control and visibility. Whether you're an expert practitioner who wants to get into the details of the notebooks that are generated, or you want to review explainability capabilities, explainability reports, Autopilot provides you that visibility. And we'll go through this in a lot more detail in the demo. So how does Amazon SageMaker Autopilot actually automate this model building, right? So very simply, actually, just in terms of what's needed, what do you do when you want to come and use Autopilot? So you simply come in with your data set. Today, Autopilot works with tabular data set. So you bring in a CSV file, which has your tabular data set. This may be in S3 today. And then with that, you just start an experiment within SageMaker Autopilot and let that run through. At the end of the experiment, you actually get a list of models, and we'll see that very shortly. And then all you do is you go through and identify the model. It identifies the best model, but you look through the models and you select a model to deploy and make predictions. So, at a high level, as you can see, you don't really require extensive machine learning capabilities to use Autopilot. You just come in with your data set and the prediction or the problem type prediction that you're trying to make, and then you let Autopilot run through the experimentation and provide you a model that can be deployed. Now that sounds super simple. And to truly appreciate that, I think it helps as you kind of think through how would you do this process manually. As you can imagine, if you're manually creating a machine learning model, that process tends to be a very iterative and interactive process. So at the very first step, you may be starting with just your data prep and data processing, looking through feature engineering. Maybe you're just assessing the quality of data, going through basic imputation techniques or handling outliers, applying normalization. So kind of just doing that pre-processing work up front. And then after your prep is done, you move into the second phase here, which is sort of the training phase, as I'm showing here. And through the training process, of course, you're looking through lots of algorithms, choosing the right one based on your experience, and going through this iterative process to try multiple algorithms. Again, the second part here is really the tuning aspect, where where you're now also controlling a lots of knobs and tuning and making finer adjustments to get a better model performance. Typically, you might start with a broad range of hyperparameters, and then you kind of work through that to tune and get to the performance that you're looking for. And so through these three steps, there's a lot of iteration, and you may go back to as you kind of explore the model training, you may go back to some prep, or as you do tuning, you may go back to your training aspect of algorithm selection. So in that sense, it's not really a linear path, and it is very iterative, and it can take considerable amount of time if you're doing this manually. And so that's the beauty and the power of Autopilot. It'll actually automate all of this for you, and it gives you this single API call that you can actually use to start Autopilot experiment and get the final optimized models for your data set. And you can do the same thing with few clicks in Studio that I'll actually show you in the demo. Okay, so what kind of problems can Autopilot solve today? As I mentioned earlier, Autopilot works with tabular datasets, and today we support regression and classification problems, both binary classification and multi-class classification. So whether you're trying to predict a continuous value of an input or of a feature, or you're trying to place an observation and classify it in two or multiple categories or classes, you can do so, right? So what does it really mean for your business set of problems? This actually, just with regression and classification, it actually opens up a lot of business scenarios that you can handle, or use cases, whether it's a very important customer churn prediction, or predicting customer spend and lifetime value, or classifying a risk of loan or default, or trying to identify customers who may be likely to respond or participate or respond to a sales campaign, as an example. So there are lots of use cases that open up with Autopilot. As I mentioned earlier, what do you need to do? You need to come in with your raw data set. This is tabular data set, and today it needs to reside in Amazon S3. So you bring in your tabular data set, upload it in an S3 bucket, and then to get started, you just specify which is the target column that you're trying to make a prediction on. From there on, Autopilot does its job. It'll go through the model creation exercise of finding the algorithm, training and tuning, and get that done right so that you have the right model for your data set. Now, behind the scenes, of course, it'll do the split in terms of training data set and validation data set. But again, you get the visibility and transparency in terms of the notebooks, so you can understand what Autopilot did. But you don't really have to manage any of these pieces. Finally, the output of Autopilot is this leaderboard, or the model leaderboard, that allows you to find the best model for your needs and then deploy that. Okay, I'm going to quickly walk through some of these details because we will get into this in the demo. But essentially, I mentioned a couple of times that Autopilot does share these notebooks at the end of the experimentation. And so there are two sets of notebooks. There's this candidate generation notebook and data exploration notebook, both of which essentially give you all the details, and these are both runnable notebooks. So for the data exploration side, it actually gives you the detail of the data set and the statistics, number of rows and columns, and maybe some suggested remedies as well in terms of what you can do with if you were to sort of come in again with a similar data set. Now, besides the actual list of outputs or models that get generated with Autopilot, We also include explainability reports. So for example, I'm showing here the feature importance, which will help you understand and explain how a model was created and how also each of the features is actually contributing to the model. Which are the features in your dataset that are actually impacting the model the most. Okay, and again, we'll see this in the demo, but the other notebook is the actual candidate generation notebook. And so it kind of shows you what happened, what's actually happening end to end, as well as it gives you some controls. If you are comfortable using notebooks and you wanted to tweak certain aspect, then it actually highlights, what are maybe some of the changes that you can do or you may want to consider. So with that, I'll actually shift gears and get into the demo. All right. So I've logged into the AWS console and you can see I'm within Amazon SageMaker. From here, I'm going to launch the studio. That is where you access Autopilot. I have the landing page open here. So you get into studio and this is what you see. Right here in the center, you can see build models automatically with SageMaker Autopilot. So you can click on that and get started to run a new experiment. Additionally, you can also just come in to the main menu within the studio and actually, start a new experiment. Okay. So let's get into an experiment. I'm just going to give a name for what I'm trying to do. So experiment name here. Now what do I need next? Then I need to point to my input data set. So I'm going to go through my account and find my CSV file, which I want to run the experiment on. And once you do this, you can actually see here in the target column, it actually shows all the features of the columns that are detected in your in the header of your dataset. So I'm going to go and actually select the column that I want to predict on. So before I proceed further, a little bit about the use case that I'm trying to run. So I have a data set which has information about customers or patterns of a bank. And what I'm going to be trying to predict is which of these users are likely to respond to a reach out campaign. So in that sense, I'm trying to predict whether or not this user should be targeted and are they likely to respond. So it's a yes or no classification that I'm actually looking for, and so we'll run through that. All right, so once you do this, all you need to do sort of next is provide a location for the output. So I'm just going to enter that. Okay. Now, in my case, I briefly alluded saying, I know I'm trying to do a binary classification problem. So in that case, I can actually go and select binary classification. If I do so, Autopilot also shows me the metrics that I can optimize on. So in this case, I can pick the metric that I'm trying to optimize for. Now, if you don't know your problem type, you can very well just leave this as auto and Autopilot will figure it out. Okay. So just a, quick recap, right? All I did was I gave a name for the experiment. I provided the input location of where my data resides. And I selected what is it that I'm trying to predict, or the target column. And finally, I gave an output location for where I want all the artifacts to be stored. That's really all you need to do. And then I can actually go ahead and start a create experiment. But before I do that, I just want to show you a couple more things. Right, so one, you might notice that there is this option which is called auto deploy, which is on. What is that? Now, when you create a model, we talked about this earlier, when you create a model, you want to deploy this model to run an inference. So there are technically two options. You can either run a batch inference to make predictions, or you can set up an endpoint to make a real-time inference. And so if you want to do that, you can leave this option as on, and what it'll do is it'll create an endpoint for real-time inference. So I think that's a neat capability. I don't have to come back once the experiment is done and then set up this endpoint. So I will make use of this. Just leave this as inference endpoint. There are also a few advanced settings related to security. I'm not going to go through those. And so that's all. I'm going to just click on create experiment. Here it gives me a confirmation saying, do you really want to set up an endpoint for real-time predictions? And yes, I do. So I'm going to go ahead. Now, you can see that Autopilot will actually go through all of these steps that we talked about earlier. It'll go through the pre-processing, do the cleanup for you, look through missing values, evaluate, generate the candidate definitions, and then go through the feature engineering piece itself. So I just gave Autopilot my data set, and then there you go. It has started going through step 1 for pre-processing. So it kind of gives you visibility in terms of what Autopilot is actually doing behind the scenes. And here it also points out that these artifacts, any artifacts that are generated through this process will be now saved in your output S3 bucket that I specified earlier. Okay, so this process can actually take some time. It can take, maybe 45 minutes, an hour, maybe longer. It depends on your data set. So what I did was I'm actually going to go back to an older experiment I ran. You can see I used a similar name. I did this a couple days ago, but just wanted to show you the output of what it would look like. So here, in this output, we're showing a leaderboard of all the models that Autopilot actually explored. And it identifies the best model. This is based on the F1 score. So it's sorted by that, and you can kind of quickly go through, any additional models that you wanted to look into. And if I go in here, I can actually look through the model details. So very important thing in terms of explainability, you can see the feature importance report here. And as we run through this experiment, it shows, what are the features that impacted this model the most. So, you can review if from a business standpoint, this is something that you can actually explain, or if this makes sense to you, because that's what the data seems to be indicating. So you can review this quickly from an explainability perspective. Or if you want to maybe drop some columns and, you want to eliminate some features, you can do that. And so this report will help you kind of make that judgment. You can also export this report and share it with the other data scientists that you collaborate with, and share it with your team. And here's a list of artifacts that it actually generates. Oops. Here's a list of artifacts that it generates. It shows you, how the split was between training and validation data set, and all the artifacts that were generated as a part of this experiment. They're all saved in the S3 bucket. Now, I'm going to go back and actually show you the notebooks itself. So let's first look at the candidate generation notebook. So the candidate generation notebook will help you identify what actually happened, right? And I think the basically the whole idea behind sharing these notebooks is not only do you have the model, but you know exactly what Autopilot did to actually get to that point, right? So with respect to the candidate generation notebook itself, it'll show you the candidate pipeline. Let me show that. And here it does say that this is, this notebook will actually help build binary classification problem, which was optimizing for the F1 score that I showed you earlier. And this is a fully, you can see all the details, and this is a fully runnable, editable and runnable notebook. So this is yours. You can use it from this point onwards. There you go. It actually shows you the candidate pipelines. And then it also shows you additional knobs and controls that you have if you wanted to tweak certain aspects. So for example, here for XG Boost, in the pipelines that it explored, it shows the imputation to convert missing values, handling missing values. And if I go down, it'll show me the same thing for any other pipeline that it explored. Here it shows another one for linear learner. And so you kind of get full visibility as to the process that Autopilot used behind the scene. Now, let's get into the data exploration. Again, this is for folks who want to get into the details of the notebook. So I'm just, going through some of these details. Now, if you don't want to tweak the notebook, or you don't really need this visibility, you just don't have to use these notebooks. But for data exploration, it shows essentially, not just how many rows were parsed, how many columns were identified. You can see here, and what is the target column. Again, this was a binary classification problem, and it actually shows you a snippet of the data itself. Going down, you'll see additional statistics about the data. So there you go. There are count statistics. There's also descriptive statistics underneath. So you kind of get the full picture of the data exploration itself. With that, you kind of see the output of Autopilot. I want to show you one last thing. So since I did set up inference as an endpoint, I can go in here, and I am within Amazon SageMaker still. I'm just out of Studio. I'm clicking through the endpoints. And so this is where your endpoints will actually show up. So you can use this to run real-time predictions once your experiment is complete. All right, so I'm going to shift back to my slides. Okay, just a quick recap. So I came in, I started with my tabular data set. I specified my target column that I'm trying to predict on. And then Autopilot did the rest in terms of actual model creation and giving you not only the output in the explainability report, but also the notebook should you need control and you want to tinker around with the actual code. Okay. So one kind of final thing just to touch upon, essentially, since Autopilot is built on SageMaker, you get access, you get the access control and the permissions for the models and all the resources associated, including the artifacts that are stored in S3, so you can easily manage access control for these artifacts as well. Now, Autopilot and SageMaker are also compliant with multiple compliance standards, including PCI, SOC, FedRAMP, HIPAA, and more. Now, finally, let's talk a little bit about how some of our customers are using Autopilot today. And these references are also available on the Autopilot product page, so you can actually get more details there. But Freddy's is a good example Freddy's uses our integration with Domo today. So Domo has machine learning capabilities. There are some of the capabilities powered by Autopilot. And so Freddy's was able to use Autopilot, and it helped them optimize the menu mix and the pricing at different locations. Freddy's is a restaurant chain, so they actually optimize this menu mix to drive growth. I think if you actually look at the quote on our website, they talk about how earlier they were kind of looking at two restaurants that maybe look similar and trying to work through this mix of menu. But now with Autopilot, they were actually able to gain insights into the relationship between the menu options, the customers, and the locations, and get to this right optimized mix. Another cool example which captures a lot of imagination is HawkEye 360. So HawkEye 360 uses Autopilot to rapidly generate high quality AI models that help them detect and classify whether a maritime vessel could be a possible risk or not. And finally, Skullcandy. So Skullcandy used Autopilot to essentially stay ahead of the curve during COVID times when they saw a surge in their load, and they were able to essentially use Autopilot to better understand their customer needs and improve how they were handling issues, and essentially improve customer, in turn improve customer satisfaction. So with some of these stories, you get to see a range of industries and range of use cases as to how some of the customers are using Autopilot. I will leave you with some more resources here. Just feel free to go through these and learn more about Autopilot. There's the Autopilot product page. In terms of the demo, I only showed you the demo from the Studio UI. But everything I showed is also available. The same capability is available through API, CLI, and Python SDK. So leaving you with some of the documentation links. Finally, to learn more about AutoML solutions from AWS, feel free to explore the entire portfolio, as well as join us for some of our upcoming sessions at the Machine Learning Summit. So I highly encourage you, go check out the upcoming events and join us to learn more. Thank you all. Thanks again for taking the time to join us today.